Good day and welcome to the Whole-Family Approaches to Research and Practice, a look at CAP Tulsa's 2Gen CareerAdvance Program conference call. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Ms. Amelia Popham. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you today to the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, or SSRC, webinar entitled Whole-Family Approaches to Research and Practice, a look at CAP Tulsa's 2Gen CareerAdvance Program. I am Amelia Popham, and I work for the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, or OPRE. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to talk about the SSRC and provide some logistical information about this webinar. The SSRC's website on your screen here is opressrc.org, and we encourage you to visit the website and get familiar with the library, tools, and materials. Information, literature, and research featured on the website is organized into key domains of self-sufficiency, which include but are not limited to employment, education, health, transportation, family formation, and TANF, among others. The SSRC offers a virtual portal of research and other resources related to these self-sufficiency domains. It also functions as an online community for researchers, practitioners, and other stakeholders interested in self-sufficiency, employment, and family and child well-being. The SSRC's primary purpose is to disseminate quality research. They currently have over 7,200 items in the library and are constantly adding new resources. The library's materials are organized into 12 topical areas, or domains of self-sufficiency, that are listed on the right hand of your screen. Every item included in the library is reviewed for relevancy. Users may search by keyword or use filters like topic area, target population, geographic location, or research methodology to browse the collection. Every topic area page under the Browse Topics tab includes an Our Librarian Recommends box that highlights research and resources recommended by the SSRC library team. Each topical area page also includes relevant federal laws and regulations. Under the Stay Connected tab, you'll find entities involved in self-sufficiency research and a list of organizations that have partnered with the SSRC to host events and share publications related to the field of self-sufficiency. You'll also find an events calendar that includes in-person and virtual events relevant to the field of self-sufficiency. Please visit this tab to access previous webinar recordings and additional materials. Finally, the SSRC houses a number of data sets and sources to support program management and facilitate improved outcomes for children, families, and communities. On the right side of your screen, you'll find links to the library Emerging Scholars information page and a link to subscribe to the monthly newsletter. Select the title and then click the Browse To button for those links to open in a new window. And now, before I turn it over to our distinguished panel, I want to provide a bit of context and background related to the Health Profession Opportunities Grants, or HPOG, and the OPRE's HPOG Evaluation Portfolio. HPOG is a grant program that funds education and training for TANF recipients and other low-income individuals for occupations in the healthcare field. ACF's Office of Family Assistance, which administers the HPOG program, has awarded 2 rounds of 5-year HPOG grants. The first round of grants, known as HPOG 1.0, operated from 2010 to 2015. The second round of grants, known as HPOG 2.0, was established in 2015 and will operate through 2020. And this slide shows you the locations of the 32 HPOG 2.0 grantees, including, of course, the Community Action Project of Tulsa County, or CAP Tulsa, which we'll be hearing more about today. HPOG was authorized as a demonstration program, and the authorizing legislation mandated a federal evaluation. To comply with this mandate, OPRE is using a multi-pronged evaluation strategy to assess the success of both rounds of HPOG. All HPOG 1.0 and 2.0 grantees are participating in some kind of evaluation under this portfolio. One component of OPRE's HPOG evaluation portfolio is the HPOG University Partnership Research Grants, or what we refer to sometimes as HPOG UP. These research grants were awarded to university-based researchers to conduct studies in partnership with an HPOG program. These studies focus on questions relevant to the HPOG program partner and improving HPOG services in the local context. The research questions being answered in these studies also benefit the larger employment and self-sufficiency research field. And 3 of the HPOG UP 2.0 research grantees include Brandeis University in partnership with the Workplace, Loyola University in partnership with Chicago State University, and of course the focus of today's webinar, Northwestern University in partnership with CAP Tulsa. For more information about OPRE's HPOG evaluation portfolio, including the 3 HPOG UP 2.0 grantee studies, please visit the careerpathways.org website or OPRE's website provided on the slide. And now I will introduce today's speakers. Today's webinar features 3 distinguished speakers who will shed light on what we know about Career Pathways programs and 2-generation approaches. First, we will hear from Dr. Kathleen Dwyer, a Senior Social Science Research Analyst in OPRE. She's the team lead for parenting and parent well-being research with a diverse portfolio spanning child development, parenting, early care and education, and approaches to improving child and family well-being. She leads work exploring 2-generation approaches to improving family self-sufficiency, including a set of grants testing targeted 2-generation approaches within the context of Head Start. Then we will hear from Janae Bradford, Assistant Director of Family Advancement Services and Partnerships at CAP Tulsa. She has worked at CAP Tulsa since 2006, where she has been primarily responsible for project design and management, as well as external partnerships relating to programs which strive to improve the economic stability of parents with young children through a 2-generation approach. During her career, Dr. Bradford has been involved with a number of innovative projects, from improving access to public benefits to tax time asset building and sector-based workforce development, all aimed at improving conditions for low-income families and children. Then we will hear from Dr. Terri Sabol, Assistant Professor at Northwestern University. Dr. Sabol's research focuses on the individual and environmental factors that lead to healthy child development, with a particular emphasis on schools and families. She applies developmental theory, psychological measurement, and advanced quantitative methods to pressing social policy issues that affect low-income children and families. And finally, we will hear from Dr. Teresa Sommer, Research Associate Professor at the Institute for Policy Research at Northwestern University. Dr. Sommer's work focuses on the intersection of policy and practice for economically disadvantaged families and their children. She specializes in how social and educational institutions influence the life course of families, especially through investments in human and social capital, including basic life skills, education, and social networks. And before I turn it over to Kathleen, I just want to note that while listening to any one of our speakers today, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen. We'll address all questions at the end of the presentation. If you can, when typing your question, please mention which speaker you're addressing the question to. And finally, we encourage you to join today's conversation on Twitter using the SSRC webinar hashtag displayed on the screen. Thank you, and I will now turn things over to Kathleen Dwyer. Great, thank you so much, Amelia. Great. So over recent years, there's been increasing interest in whole family approaches at the federal, state, and local levels. Of course, many ACF programs do serve multiple generations. One example, of course, is Head Start. Since its inception, Head Start has been considered a 2-generation program, primarily focusing on children's school readiness, but also addressing parental well-being, health, safety, and financial stability. However, there's a great variation in terms of whether and how individual programs target adult capacities. I will note that in 2013, ACF awarded 4 grants for Head Start university partnerships to implement and rigorously evaluate targeted approaches that combine intensive that combine intensive, high-quality, child-focused programs with intensive, high-quality, adult-focused services to support both parent well-being and children's school readiness within the context of Head Start. And these grants are winding up this year, so we are expecting findings from these grants soon. And among many other examples of programs that serve multiple generations, the HPOG program and Tribal HPOG program provide opportunities for health education and training for low-income individuals, and at least 2 of these grantees took the opportunity to implement a 2-generation approach, including the grantee you will be hearing from today. At the federal level, ACF is also actively supporting multiple state efforts to promote whole family approaches to reducing intergenerational poverty. For example, from the Office of Child Care, a new funding announcement for preschool development grants, birth through 5, encourages states to consider their full system of programs and services that strengthen, engage, and stabilize families and children. Further, ACF has partnered with Ascend at the Aspen Institute and others to convene state and local human services leaders and stakeholders in various regional policy summits. For example, in Region 1, or the 6 New England states, a whole family approach to jobs, helping parents work and children thrive, is a partnership between the National Conference of State Legislatures and ACF, with primary funding provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. The initiative has brought together public and private sector stakeholders across workforce development, human services, and education to identify policy opportunities, lessons learned, and challenges faced by states seeking to implement whole family approaches to economic opportunity that benefit low-income parents. And another example is in Region 5, ACF partnered with the Mayor's Office of the City of Chicago, the Governor's Office of the State of Illinois, and Ascend to convene Whole Family Success, Advancing Excellence in 2-Generation programs. And on this slide are just a few examples from the past year. To provide some deeper context, 3 years ago, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation launched the project Integrated Approaches to Supporting Child Development and Improving Family Economic Security. We launched the project to better understand the scope of the programs in the field, document the state of research and evaluation efforts, understand better quality, intensity, and intentionality of services, and to make recommendations regarding the evaluations that may be feasible, relevant, and useful to ACF and to the field in the future. The project included a targeted literature review, expert consultations, an environmental scan, development of 2 conceptual frameworks, and site visits. It was carried out by Mathematica Policy Research with consultants from Northwestern University, including Dr. Sommer, and it was completed earlier this year. A report and 3 practitioner-oriented briefs are available on OPRE's website, and they're listed here on this slide. The scan, which was conducted in early 2016, found 52 active programs that met our project-specific definition for intentionally combining services for children with services for parents. And features of these programs are described in the report and the first brief listed here on this slide. I also wanted to note that we've also started a new project that is following up on this work to explore how states and communities are coordinating a broader set of services related to early care and education, family economic security, and other health and human services across sectors to most efficiently and effectively serve low-income children and their families. This work just started in the fall, and it's also being carried out by Mathematica Policy Research, but the work is proceeding rapidly. One of our primary purposes for conducting the Integrated Approaches project was to determine the state of the research on programs that integrate family economic security and child development services. And then given that research, lay out some options for future research on programs such as these. In terms of the state of the research, in the literature review and program scan, we identified few programs that had engaged in any research or evaluation. We found 6 programs had engaged in implementation research, though only 4 of those programs were still operating at that time. And only 2 programs have participated in studies of their effectiveness. Also, in our program scan, we found that most programs are in the early stages of program development. And given that finding, we focused a research brief on designing research and evaluation accordingly. Further, the report and research and evaluation brief discuss the benefits of conducting research and evaluation that matches the stage of program development. Research can contribute to stronger implementation of service approaches, can inform the field about promising strategies, and eventually can address questions about the impacts of these programs on parents' economic security and children's development. We also looked at programs' current capacity to carry out research and evaluation. And again, we found that few programs had either in-house staff with data analysis capacity to support their implementation efforts or external research and evaluation partners. Only 3 programs had in-house capacity and used their data to inform program development. And 2 programs had external research partners with whom they had partnered early in implementation, and research had been infused into the process of developing the program. One of those programs is the featured program of today's webinar, CareerAdvance at CAP Tulsa. The report and a research and evaluation brief both discuss how partnerships such as these can help strengthen programs. And now it's my pleasure to hand it over to our first presenter, Janae Bradford, who will provide the program perspective on CAP Tulsa's CareerAdvance program.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. Good afternoon, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Janae Bradford, and I'm with CAP Tulsa. I'm very excited to be here and talk to you a little bit about our agency and our 2-generation approach and programs. So quickly, what I'm going to go through is how we define a 2-generation approach, a little bit about our agency, why we chose to take a 2-generation approach at CAP, and then dive a little bit deeper into our CareerAdvance and other 2-gen programs. Time permitting, I'll list out just a few other promising practices, most of which have already been called out. So let's jump right in. In a nutshell, 2-generation approach is one that provides opportunities for and meets the needs of children and their parents together. The graphic on this slide is actually from Ascend at the Aspen Institute, and I feel like it's a great depiction of those components that are needed in a strong 2-generation approach. You've got the early childhood education for the kids, health and social capital for the family, and economic assets and connection to education and employment for the parents. All the components work together to really lift that family up. One of our research partners, Lindsay Chase Lansdale, who is with the Northwestern team, she once said that the child cannot be the change agent alone. And that statement really lit the light bulb for me and helped me understand why a 2-generation approach is so important. Those of us in the early childhood space can't assume that just because we invest so heavily in the child for the first 1 to 5 years of their life, that our investment will lead to future success. That child goes home to his family at night. You know, if his home life is not stable, if mom or dad don't have access to growth and income potential, the chances of him growing up and raising his own children above the poverty line are slim. And so that's why we have to start looking at the whole family and supporting both the adults and the children simultaneously to really make that impact. Community partnerships I wanted to touch on a little bit. They're so crucial to the success of these 2-generation strategies. It really doesn't make good business sense for one agency to try to be everything to everyone. So, you know, if you're a Head Start or early childhood provider like us, team up with an adult education provider to create opportunities for those parents of the children you're already serving. If you're in the business of serving adults, how can you help get their children into high-quality learning environments? a good example of this, so under our first round of HPOG funding, we were a 1.0 and now a 2.0 grantee. Under the first round, we tried to do it all, but we're not a workforce development agency. We're in the business of early childhood ed. So, at the time, our coaches mostly had backgrounds in academic advising. We weren't skilled in employer speak. Connecting parents to careers was very difficult for us, and our lack of these relevant skills showed up clearly in low employment outcomes. We learned from experience and partnered with a workforce development agency in our community that was experienced in employer relations and had a proven track record of high job placement rates. So if you see this continuum that's on your screen right now, we really went from a child-focused program with parent components. We combined with a parent or adult-focused workforce development program, which then has moved our overall offering closer to the middle and really truly serving the whole family. Before I dive into our specific programs, I do want to give you all a little bit of a background on our agency. So CAP Tulsa is one of the largest anti-poverty agencies in the state of Oklahoma. We serve about 2,400 children aged 0 to 5 and their families each year. We truly believe every family and every child deserves the same opportunity for success, and we back that up by providing high-quality early childhood education through both center-based and home-based offerings, while also helping the parents of those children really succeed through initiatives designed for things like increasing parenting skills, behavioral and mental health services, and then obviously employability and increasing earning potential, which is what we're going to talk about today. So why did we decide to embrace a two-generation approach? Well, back in 2011, we were in a strategic planning process in which we challenged ourselves to triple our impact. At the time, we were attuned to growing research on how important early childhood education is, and that really convinced us to continue on our journey and really focus on our efforts with the young children. But there was also emerging research talking about the positive effects of extra income coming into the household on child outcomes as well. For example, like Greg Duncan's work that found that something as little as $1,000 additional income in a year had positive impacts on child's academic success. So we decided to combine those two thoughts, and we set out to develop, the highest quality early childhood education program we could, while also creating these high quality intensive investments in the parents as well, and working towards improving their income potential. My department was formerly known as Financial Services at the time, and we housed your traditional community action agency programs like free tax preparation, first-time homebuyer, down payment closing cost assistance, those kind of things. We looked at those programs and saw that we actually, while they were very successful, we weren't seeing much take-up from families who had children in our schools. And so as part of that strategic planning process, we decided to spin those lines of business off to others in the community doing similar work. And we rebranded our department as Family Advancement and really shifted our agency focus to the whole family. I want to play a quick video for you all. This is Kalula. She's a former CareerAdvance participant, and I just feel like she does a really great job of telling the 2Gen story, and so I'm going to go ahead and have this play for you.
Before CareerAdvance, I viewed my life as hopeless. I had a child at 16, and there I had so many people against me saying that you are not going to amount to anything, you're just going to become another statistic. It kind of just grew on me like, okay, well, this is it. The best I'm going to get is that I'm going to live on housing for the rest of my life. At least my bills are half paid, and raise my kids that way with the government's help all my life. For a moment there, I was okay with it, but in my heart, I knew there was something that was not right about it.
Lula, when she first started, was very excited and anxious and afraid.
I didn't really think that I could go to college because I started out with a very low reading level.
She actually got in. She was right on the edge of actually passing the test to qualify for the program, but they still gave her the chance.
They offer us classes on math and building our skills before we entered college. And I think by that, knowing they did that, took the time and the money and effort to do that, that right there, I knew I had to continue to finish.
Everyone deserves an opportunity for advancement. And with this program, it is a grand opportunity.
She's finishing her associate's degree. She's taking one last class, and she's done.
I definitely feel a part of I feel like I'm assisting the community by becoming self-sufficient and knowing that where you came from and knowing where you can end up, I feel like I've done a justice to my society.
CareerAdvance has a huge impact on a community, and the way it does, it takes a set of individuals who have strong goals for themselves and for their children, and it gives them the opportunity to achieve that goal and to change the future of these kids and the next generation going ahead.
My son's future is going to be so much brighter. He saw how hard I worked in school. It sparked an interest in his life that if Mommy can do it, I can do it. I am so thrilled and so excited to see what the future has for us. I really do.
Great. So my favorite quote in that is at the end when Kalula says, "My son's future is going to be so much brighter because of this." She really tapped into what we're trying to do with the 2-generation approaches. So I want to go over a little bit about our early childhood education, and then I'll jump into CareerAdvance. So at CAP, we really strive to offer high quality early childhood ed. We are a Head Start and Early Head Start grantee. We also have some state and local funding that supports our program. We have 151 classrooms across 12 schools here in the Tulsa area, and as I said earlier, we serve about 2,400 kids. We have degreed and certified teachers, state-of-the-art facilities, everything you see here on the screen. You know, we really try to embrace the families and help break down barriers as much as possible. I want to show you a couple pictures too, just so you can kind of get a visual. This is the front and the back of one of our schools. Most of our schools that we've built ourselves look similar to this. This is an actual family, actual mom and 2 kiddos that go to our Disney location. And then here's the inside of our classrooms. Very bright and fun and colorful, kid-friendly, everything's small size, kid size, so just I like to share those fun pictures so everybody can kind of get a visual of what it looks like inside our classrooms. So just like we strive to provide high quality for the children, we also do so at, for the parent programs as well. And 2 of our nationally recognized 2-gen programs are CareerAdvance and our English as a Second Language program. CareerAdvance, as you may have already guessed, is a sector-based workforce development training which has primarily been focused on the healthcare sector to date because we are an HPOG funding recipient. But we've also recently added a child development associate track to start growing our own early childhood teaching assistants. Our ESL class, or ESL program, excuse me, is contextualized to life as a parent of a young child. We use actual situations from our schools like parent-teacher conferences, calling your child out sick, or reading to your child as practice in the adult classrooms. So workforce development and ESL programs exist all across the country. Why are ours so special? Well, they're special because we've deliberately designed these 2 programs specifically for low-income parents of young children. While parents are enrolled in CareerAdvance, their children are learning and growing in CAP Tulsa's early childhood schools and programs. This slide from our friends at Northwestern gives a good visual of what it takes to really pull off a program like CareerAdvance, and you'll see all the different players, the components, and we'll dive in on the next slide a little bit deeper. So in these programs, adult students are enrolled in peer cohorts, which means a CareerAdvance certified nursing assistant class will be filled entirely of parents from CAP Tulsa and surrounding early childhood providers, and then likewise for our ESL programs. The purpose of the cohort is really to encourage peer networking, building those relationships with each other, and growing social networks. Thanks to our research partners, we actually have some really great anecdotes from this over the years. Several people have reported back that they met their best friend in a CareerAdvance cohort. Others have talked about how much support and motivation they get from each other. One participant told us something along the lines of, if I try to skip class, my phone blows up with 15 texts from classmates saying, if I can do it, you can do it, get your butt to class. So, they study together, they watch each other's kids, they carpool, they really become a close-knit group. The cohorts meet regularly outside of class as well to get additional training in soft skills and career readiness. We call these peer partner meetings, and they're also used to integrate topics relevant to parents of young children, like schedules and routines, things like studying with children underfoot, and similar topics. A really integral component of our two-generation adult programs is the coach role. Our coaches use a strengths-based and client-focused approach to really empower and encourage our parents. The coaches facilitate both one-on-one and group sessions for things like goal setting, advising, and mentoring. They really are a shoulder to cry on or lean on, and they work with the participants to break down barriers as they arise. I got ahead of myself there, sorry. In addition to our coaches, we also have family support specialists, and they're available to case manage other issues and help with emergencies. They also can connect our parents to behavioral and mental health services as needed. This role is another example of how we've capitalized on partnerships to improve the program. Our coaches were running into several life crises with participants which they were not trained to handle, like domestic violence or food insecurity. We were able to add a dedicated family support specialist role for program participants, and that family support specialist is actually employed by our partner agency, Family and Children's Services. The specialists are connected to community resources and able to help families navigate crises as they arise, while our coaches continue to work with the parents to keep them on track academically. Additionally, a financial coach is available to work with participants. They present at the partner meetings that I discussed just a minute ago, and they're also available to set up one-on-one sessions and talk about setting financial goals and plans. Through our partnership with the workforce development agency I mentioned previously, which is called Tulsa Community Work Advance, we have career advisors available to our parents. And these advisors really ensure that the participants are as prepared as possible for their new careers. They work with the cohorts throughout the program on resume writing, interview practice, and then the advisors actually connect the parents to job interviews. And they also follow up with the participants post-placement to stay on top of retention and promotion opportunities. And because of our generous funding, currently all tuition, fees, books, and class-required supplies are paid for to reduce the out-of-pocket expense for our parents. We also currently are able to provide transportation assistance in the form of a monthly gas card or a bus pass, and we can pay for additional child care costs if they have children not enrolled in CAP Tulsa's early childhood education program. Our adult classes right now, for the most part, are scheduled during daytime hours, typically while their children are in school. So we've really tried to get ahead of most of the obstacles that would typically keep a parent from continuing their education. Okay. Now on to the partners. So I've said a couple of times that we've had some great partners in the community, and it's not possible to have done this alone. So here's just a brief list of some of our local partners in our community. Union Public Schools, they provide the space and instructors for our ESL classes and assist us with adult basic education services for our CareerAdvance program. Tulsa Technology Center and Tulsa Community College are the technical training providers for CareerAdvance. And then Tulsa Community Work Advance, I discussed just a minute ago. They really are an integrated service delivery partner for us on the CareerAdvance program. They partner with us on program recruitment, selection, and onboarding, and then take the lead on career readiness training, employer relations, job placement, and then that post-placement follow-up I talked about. So CareerAdvance has really been continuously improving since inception, which has definitely kept our researchers on their toes. And as you can see from this slide, our actual training offerings have changed significantly since pilot stage 9 years ago. In the beginning, we assumed everyone enrolled would get into and complete nursing school within 2 years. We quickly realized how wrong we were. In reality, it took our first RN 5 years to complete. We've shifted to offering tracks that are shorter in duration and really get the participants into jobs more quickly, where they can start earning a wage and gaining experience. They can then either enroll in another training with us or take advantage of employer-sponsored training when available to continue climbing that career ladder. In addition to adjusting training offerings, we've altered partner meeting delivery methods as well. In the beginning, our peer partner meetings were 2 hours a week, each week by track. These meetings were facilitated by coaches and covered soft skills and employment skills we discussed previously. In 2017, the team used a human-centered design approach to gather feedback on this partner meeting model. And based on input from current and past participants as well as staff, the delivery method was revised to a workshop model where participants have some choice in the topics. And we were also able to build in slack or flex time in this new model, so the students have some time where their children are in school or childcare and they can take care of whatever they need, getting the groceries, cleaning the house, studying, maybe just me time. It's really up to them. And as my time winds down, I want to just leave you with some resources and promising practices. Most of these were mentioned earlier by Amelia or Kathleen. Ascend is a really great supporter of the 2Gen movement. Their website is jam-packed with great resources, studies, briefs, etc. So check them out if you haven't already. Another one I'll point out on here, the Community Foundation of Sarasota County. They are really trying to integrate 2Gen into their community through a collective impact approach. They're combining nonprofits, schools, community leaders, business partners, and citizens to really lead change. So they also have a lot of information on their website as well. Amelia and Kathleen also touched on ACF and OFA and what they're doing specifically through the HPOG program and really integrating a 2Gen approach for all of us, the grantees, through that. OFA, the Office of Family Assistance, has also really worked hard to integrate 2Gen approaches in their TANF providers. And this is a list of states that participated in an intensive TA process a few years ago and have really done a good job of changing the way they offer TANF to families and how they really work with the whole family, not just the adults. So the reason we're here, we're talking about our program and the evaluation of it, and really since the creation of CareerAdvance back in 2009, we've closely partnered with various research teams to be sure we're collecting evidence on our 2Gen offerings to inform the field and future work in this area and also make sure what we're providing to our families is top-notch. Without our research partners, especially those at Northwestern who you'll hear from in just a minute, CareerAdvance would not exist. They worked with the University of Texas Ray Marshall Center to combine expertise in early childhood education and workforce development to create the original concept for our program, and they've stayed with us throughout the duration of the program. Very excited to be able to present with Teresa and Terri today, mostly because it means I don't have to fumble through the findings and try to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but also because they and their teams have worked just as tirelessly on CareerAdvance as my team has, and I'm so glad that they're here to share some of the initial findings. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Terri.
Thank you so much, Janae. So this is Teresa Sommer. Terri will be talking after I'm finished. We're both at Northwestern University. And I just want to reiterate that it's been an incredible 8-plus-year partnership and that this work represents an enormous team of both researchers and practitioners. And we really couldn't have done this without that team. And I particularly want to call out Lindsay Chase Lansdale, who has co-led this with Terri and I since the beginning. So as we said, what we'll be speaking on today is the short-term effects of CareerAdvance on both children and parents. I just want to start, of course, Janae's given us a phenomenal background on CAP Tulsa, but from a research perspective, we want to say that CAP Tulsa is a proven high-quality early education program. In the short term, we've seen that it increases school readiness of children, and then in a slightly longer term, has reduced grade retention and reduced chronic absence in middle school. And we wouldn't consider adding a workforce training program to early childhood education program unless it was already doing well and high quality. And then CAP Tulsa, as you've heard Janae speak to, has been, as an organization, able to identify that not only does early childhood education matter for children, but also the well-being and education of their parents. So if you look nationwide at the levels of education among low-income parents, in this case is low-income parents of children under the age of 6, we can see here that 2/3 of them have a high school degree or less. And we know that in the modern 21st century economy, that if you have a high school degree or less, the chances that you're going to be able to attain a family supporting wage and advance that over time is quite limited. So as Janae has well described, just to give you a heads up on the way we think about the CareerAdvance program, it's essential again that it starts from a platform of Head Start. It adds that intensive coaching for parents and peer support, which is added to the family support that's already provided from a Head Start platform. So you're building on a community of success and adding even more intensive services. It's also essential that parents get this free tuition and incentive so that that offsets when they often have to reduce their employment in order to pursue education. So CareerAdvance from the very beginning is a program that understands and addresses the connections between parents' education and children's well-being. So for example, we know from research that increases in parent education promotes outcomes for children in both the short and long term. And of course, we know and has been mentioned that parents' education improves the financial stability of the family. And then we know when parents go back to school and their children are in preschool, so children around 3, 4, and 5, it really has few negative associations with children's learning. So we think of this as a dual investment. So we all know from Heckman about the incredible returns on investment in children from a very young age. But what this is about is understanding that investing in children means investing in their parents as well as the children themselves and to promote the development of both. So just to make clear that everyone understands our definition, are shared between CAP Tulsa and us, a definition of a 2-generation approach, which is slightly more narrow than some of the other definitions, for example, promoted by Ascend. We're talking about intentionally linking programs for parents and children who are in the same family. And in this case, we're talking about education and job training for parents, and then early childhood education, most often Head Start for very young children. And one of the most important points that we've already emphasized for CAP Tulsa is that we want quality services for both parents and children, as well as intensity of services. And there's some evidence that in the past, a light touch approach did not achieve the outcomes that we're seeking. So what do we say about the evidence right now? As Kathleen pointed out earlier, the empirical evidence really does lag behind practice and policy, but that's a good way to begin to test programs and their effectiveness. So we would say that the jury is still out, but there are a few evaluations, and we're happy that we're here to present one of them today. So our theory of change here, if you can see in the blue, we're focused on the parents, and in the light purple on the children. And again, so for the parents in this career program, their children are in Head Start and they participate in a workforce training program, and that we're looking at the short-term benefits for the parents around education, employment, psychological well-being, and also equilibrium in the family. And then for the long term, which we're not testing today, we're looking at whether parents achieve stable careers, economic well-being, and better functioning family systems. And for the children, of course, we're talking about the platform of Head Start, and then we're looking about whether or not parents' participation in children's participation in Head Start, as well as their parents' participation in workforce training, improves children's attendance in the short run, as well as their readiness for school. And so the focus again today is on this set of short-term outcomes. I'll be presenting first on the parents, and then Terri will follow up on the children. So our overall research question for this study is, does CareerAdvance have a greater effect on parents and children than Head Start alone? So again, to focus on the parents, we're talking about their education, their employment, and their well-being. And for children, we're talking about attendance, chronic absence, and school readiness. So this study, which we call the CAP Family Life Study, is a quasi-experimental study because there was not a wait list for the program when we began. It was a very young program when we began our research. It takes a mixed method approach, which includes surveys of parents, direct assessments of children, focus groups of parents, and then administrative data from the CAP Tulsa agency. It's a longitudinal study. We're following the families for 3 years, and today what you're hearing about is from 1 year post-baseline for parents, 1 semester post-baseline for children's attendance and chronic absence, and 1 and 2 years post-baseline for children. So our sample here is we have selected a matched comparison group that's similar to the CareerAdvance participants using propensity score matching. And what that means is we look at everyone on their level of motivation to be in a career in the healthcare field, as well as a set of demographic characteristics such as race, age, neighborhood of residence, etc. And we found very close matching between these two groups. The sample itself is roughly almost 300 parents, or 287, and about half are in the CareerAdvance program and half in the matched comparison group. We look at a child sample. It's a slightly smaller sample for our 2 different measurements, just based on the ability to measure those for those children. So overall, we're talking about a sample that's largely mothers. They're roughly 29 years of age, so this is not a sample of teen mothers, but a third of them are single parents. Also, the average age of the children is 3 3/4 years, and the average household size is about 4, with an annual income of about 15 grand. And then ethnically, it's a sample about 40% Black, 28% white, 10% Hispanic, and 22% other, which importantly for Oklahoma includes Native Americans. And then if you remember my earlier slide on education, I showed that 2/3 of parents of children under the age of 6 had a high school degree or less. It's a little different but similar in the CAP Tulsa population, in which there are 50% in our study have a high school degree or less. Almost 50% have had some exposure to post-secondary education or certificate or an associate program, and very little a BA program. So I'm going to focus now on those parent outcomes that we outlined. And specifically, you'll learn here, we're going to kind of give you the quick summary up front, which is the parents in the CareerAdvance program as compared to the matched comparison had much higher rates of certification, significant differences in employment in the healthcare field, but not employment overall. No effects on financial hardship, improvements in psychological well-being, and no effects on stress, which we initially had hypothesized that when parents add a workforce training program to work in the care of young children, their stress may go up, but it did not. So here you can see that on the right in the dark green is the showing the rate of certification of families in the CareerAdvance program at the end of 1 year. And you can see it's 61% had a certificate and 4% in the match comparison. So very significant differences. And then if we look at employment, you can see we didn't have statistically significant differences in employment, but it's important to note that 2/3 of the program our participants are employed. But when we look at for employment in the healthcare field for which the parents are being trained, we see that 52% in the CareerAdvance program are employed in healthcare, whereas it's 30% among the match comparison. And remember, these are all parents who are motivated to be in careers in the healthcare field. And then one other thing to note is that 2/3 of the parents at the end of this first year were still enrolled in an education and training program, which could reduce their employment in the healthcare field. So overall, we don't see increases or decreases in earnings. We did not expect that within 1 year of being in a workforce training program. Those benefits usually happen 2 to 3 years down the road. We also saw average incentives of about almost $2,000, which we think would offset any reduced earnings that parents had, particularly those parents who needed to reduce their hours of work in order to balance work, school, and young children. So also we thought it was incredibly important to look at the improvements or changes potentially in psychological well-being. And what we found is that there were increases in what we call parents' career identity, or the sense of the importance of work and family. And we provide here just a couple samples of the kinds of questions in each of the categories. So for example, in career identity, the survey asks, planning for and succeeding in my career is a primary concern. We see improvements in parents' self-efficacy among those who are in the CareerAdvance group, meaning their hope about achieving their goals. In other words, at this time, I'm meeting the goals I've set for myself. And then we find improvements in optimism or hopefulness and confidence rather than pessimism. An example would be in uncertain times, I usually expect the best. So, and finally, we did not see, as I mentioned earlier, increases or decreases in perceived stress or psychological distress. So with that, that is a summary of the improvements in the human capital and psychological well-being of parents. I'm going to pass it over to Terri, my colleague, who will then talk about what is the relationship between these improvements for parents and children and what can we find in the benefits to children in school readiness.
Thanks, Teresa. So this is Terri Sabol from Northwestern as well. And today I'm going to transition to thinking about whether the gains that we see in terms of parental education, employment, and psychological well-being, whether we're also seeing similar gains for children. And on one hand, we may expect that we would see positive effects on children, particularly thinking about their academic and executive functioning skills, given the fact that we are seeing gains, particularly in parental education. However, on the other hand, we might think that that these things are happening simultaneously, and so would we actually expect that the gains in parental education are simultaneously translating to gains to children? And as Teresa mentioned, it could be challenging to juggle work, school, and family while raising young children. And moreover, CAP Tulsa has, as Teresa mentioned, has a long history and a strong evidence base showing that their high-quality programs promote children's outcomes, at least in the short term and in the long term. And so what we're looking at is above and beyond these already known and well-established positive effects, do we see that these translate to even greater gains for children? And this is a pretty high bar. So before getting into the results on children's school readiness, I'm going to first present results on the effect on attendance, which in some sense could be viewed as a family outcome, given that parents are actually responsible for the most part of bringing their children to school. And so here the question is whether CareerAdvance affects attendance in Head Start compared to the matched comparison group among a sample of children who are all enrolled in Head Start. So one hypothesis here is that parents may have increased their child care demands because they're now enrolled in a workforce training program and need the child care. But a more complex hypothesis here is that as they're advancing their own education, they may begin to see more connections between their own learning and their children's learning, and thus we may see sort of increased attendance in those regards. So the first question here is about child attendance, and we measure child attendance in two different ways. The first is just a simple measure of attendance, which is the number of days a child attended divided by the number of days a child was enrolled in one semester. The second is children's chronic absence, which is a subgroup of children who miss 15% or more school days over one semester. So these are children who are sort of defined as the percentage of children who are identified as being chronically absent. And in CAP Tulsa, the attendance rates were quite high, so about 85, the average monthly attendance was 88%. However, there still was a group of about 25% of children who are chronically absent. So the summary of results here is that we see no average effect on overall attendance, but we do see a reduction in the percentage of children who are classified as chronically absent. So what this looks like in practice is that we basically see no difference. So on average, attendance was high, so we're not really moving the needle in terms of the total, the average attendance rate between the CareerAdvance group and the match comparison group, so that 3% point difference is not significant. However, we do see a large difference between the percentage of children who are defined as chronically absent in the CareerAdvance group versus the match comparison group. So in this case, there are only 14% of the children in the CareerAdvance group are identified as being chronically absent compared to 34% in the match comparison group, which is a 20% difference, suggesting that CareerAdvance was associated with a 20% reduction in chronic absence. We then had a question of whether there were particular subgroups that potentially benefited more from CareerAdvance compared to others. And in particular, we had the hypothesis that families who potentially had the greatest risk at baseline might have benefited the most from CareerAdvance. And so we looked in terms of the reductions in chronic absenteeism. So we looked at three important subgroups. The first were families who were the lowest level of income. And as a reminder, all families in our sample were low income, but these are the families who were at the very bottom quartile of income. In addition, we looked at families or parents who started out with low levels of optimism and parents who started out with high levels of psychological distress. And overall, the story is that we get greater gains for those families who started out with the greatest levels of risk. In particular, families who had the lowest level of income, we see a 35 percentage point difference between those in the CareerAdvance group and the match comparison group, meaning that on average, if you recall, we had a 20 percentage point difference between CareerAdvance and match comparison group, but we're really seeing this being driven by those families who are in the lowest level of income. In addition, we see similar patterns for optimism and psychological distress, where the gains are greater for those families who start out with lowest levels of optimism and highest level of psychological distress, which is about a 25 percentage point difference. The second piece of the child outcome was looking at children's school readiness, and we look at this both 1 and 2 years after baseline, so after parents were enrolled in CareerAdvance. And we look at we have a direct assessment battery that includes basic numeracy and literacy, which is measured by the Bracken, receptive language measured by the PPVT, math skills or early math skills, which was measured by applied problems, and inhibitory control, which is measured by the pencil tap, which is basically that children have to inhibit a dominant response and actually do a non-dominant response. So if you hear me tap once, you should tap your pencil twice. So the summary of findings here is that we get no effects on after 1 or 2 years of CareerAdvance on Bracken, on children's basic numeracy and literacy, receptive language, or math skills. We do see a small effect on inhibitory control, a small positive effect after 1 year, but we no longer see that after 2 years. Moreover, we did look at subgroup findings to see if the findings were stronger or weaker depending on baseline parent college readiness and baseline child school readiness, and we also see effects on those things in the short and long term, which I'll talk about in greater detail. So here's a summary of our effects.
So as you can see, we see no effects on basic numeracy, language skills, or math skills, but a small effect on inhibitory control. And by the end of 2 years, we see no difference between the CareerAdvance group and the match comparison group in terms of their school readiness. So I'm going to try to interpret these results in the fact that we actually think this is positive news. Although we are not seeing significant differences for the most part between our match comparison group and CareerAdvance group, what's important to note is that the children in CAP Tulsa represent a very special group of low-income children in Head Start. So if we compare how all of the children in our sample are performing on average to national samples, they stack up quite well. So for example, children in the CareerAdvance group on receptive language, which is a standardized assessment, receive a score of about 100, and children in the match comparison group after 1 year receive a score of about 97 on average. This is about 10 points higher compared to the national average of Head Start children, which includes a sample of low-income children. And in addition, is about on par with overall national averages, which represent a range of children from socioeconomic backgrounds. In other words, the kids in CAP Tulsa after 1 year are doing really well. And so trying to see gains above and beyond those gains that those children are already receiving while being in CAP Tulsa is a high bar. And in some sense, we're encouraged that CareerAdvance is not interfering with the gains that children are already receiving while they're enrolled in CAP Tulsa. The same story can be told for math. So again, children on average in both the CareerAdvance group and the match comparison group are performing about 10 points higher compared to national averages of Head Start children and on par with overall averages. We then looked at whether there were differences in findings based on parental college readiness, which is defined as an index of parental educational attainment, meaning that they started out with relatively higher levels of education, so above a high school degree, higher age, parental age, higher income, and household size. And we also looked at children's school readiness based on their baseline academic achievement, looking at whether they started out below versus above national mean. And what we find is that children who have high college-ready parents, we do see improvements in their receptive language scores and their inhibitory control, meaning that CareerAdvance does have a positive effect among this particularly important subgroup where parents are ready, have more resources at their disposal at baseline. We are seeing improvements in receptive language and inhibitory control, but not in their literacy and numeracy or their math scores. So again, this suggests that there are some populations in which we are actually seeing gains in terms of their achievement. When we look at children in particular, we find that children who start out with low school readiness, as measured by the Bracken, those children also seem to particularly benefit from CareerAdvance, from their parents advancing their own education, psychological well-being. So we see these gains in terms of math and inhibitory control. So we're actually seeing that the CareerAdvance group is outperforming the match comparison group after 2 years on both math and inhibitory control, but not on literacy and receptive language. So again, this is exploratory, but suggests that there may be specific groups of families who are benefiting from, or specific groups of children who are benefiting from CareerAdvance. And importantly, the correlation between those families whose parents start out with high college readiness and children with low school readiness, that correlation is quite low. So we're talking about two distinct groups of families we seem to be seeing improvements in their outcomes. So in terms of pulling it all together, as Teresa summarized, we see that in terms of parental outcomes after 1 year, we see that CareerAdvance is associated with improvements in parental education, healthcare, and the employment in the healthcare sector, as well as psychological well-being. And just to put the gains in context in terms of thinking about the effects on parental education, we found that 61% of CareerAdvance participants attain a career certificate, which is quite high. Traditionally, has been very challenging to increase parental education, particularly for parents who are raising young children, and also particularly for low-income individuals, whether they're parents or not. So when we look at national rates in terms of attaining a career certificate, only 53% of non-parent students attain a certificate or degree after 6 years of enrollment. So the finding that 61% of CareerAdvance participants who are low-income parents who are getting a career certificate after 1 year is pretty exciting. In terms of children, we found that CareerAdvance led to reductions in children's rates of chronic absence, but not overall attendance in Head Start, and that adding a parental workforce training does not interfere with, and in some cases exceeds, the benefits to children of high-quality Head Start. And we're actually pitching this as good news. The kids are doing relatively well, and so the fact that adding on a workforce training program to that already high-quality programming doesn't interfere and in some cases exceeds is exciting. So the limitations of our design, of course, is that all families are enrolled in Head Start, and we're basically comparing the difference between having parents enrolled in a workforce education and workforce training program compared to sort of business as usual Head Start. And as I've mentioned, that business as usual Head Start is quite high quality. So I think for future work, we really want to start thinking about these quadrants, like what would the effects have looked like had parents not been recruited from a high-quality Head Start program, or what would have happened had the platform been a job training program instead of Head Start. So really thinking about the continuum of two-generation programs as Janae presented in her section. The lingering questions we have is first sort of what are the key components of a two-generation education program. Our study was not designed to tease apart which of the components were driving the effects. And so I think future work in terms of thinking about unpacking the mechanisms that are actually driving these effects is really important. I think the lingering question from my mind is would this have worked in a lower quality Head Start program? Is it that you have to have sort of a baseline threshold of quality in order to support a two-generation program? And moreover, what would happen if you sort of moved to a more child-centered rather than family-centered early childhood education program like pre-K? Would this type of program be as successful? And of course, we are, as Teresa outlined in the theory of change, our hypothesis is that really as parents are improving their own income, that's when we'll potentially see long-term child outcomes. And this is an open question and one which we hope to continue to look at. And lastly, as we think about the gains that both parents and children are making, as well as the cost of the program, we continue to think about sort of the cost benefit of this program in terms of both generations across the life course, and that work is continuing. So in general, what we find is that a whole family education program holds great promise, but the jury is still out, particularly in terms of long-term benefits for children. And so, of course, we have longitudinal follow-up as needed, and we're continuing to try to pull together the resources to do so. This, of course, is a model program, and it's expensive, and so we also have a study underway to think about what this would look like in a more scaled-up version and what is the effect on both parents and children. But overall, as you can tell from this call today, this webinar, that overall there's significant momentum in practice and policy, and so we think that the promise of 2Gen is solid. So of course, last but not least, I just want to again thank our program partners at CAP Tulsa, without whom this work would not be possible, as well as all of the agencies and that have supported this work. And also like to acknowledge the funders for this work, including the Administration for Children and Families and HPOG, as well as several key foundations, including the Foundation for Child Development, the Kellogg Foundation, and Ascend. So thank you so much, and with that I will pass it over to Kathleen.
Great. Thank you, Teresa and Terri.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. So as I mentioned earlier, in our scan of currently operating programs aimed at supporting child development and improving family economic security, few programs had engaged in research or evaluation. Only 2 were currently operating that have participated in studies of their effectiveness. CAP Tulsa's CareerAdvance program is one of these programs, so it's very exciting to us to start to see findings from this research. So CAP Tulsa and their research partners at Northwestern are beginning to build the evidence for their two-generation approach. As you heard today, using a quasi-experimental design, they showed that parents in the program were more likely to attain certification, more likely to be employed in healthcare, more likely to feel optimistic, efficacious, and identification with their careers compared to a matched comparison group of parents. Children of parents in the program were less likely to be chronically absent, and this is particularly true for children of parents at the lowest level of income, lowest level of optimism, and the highest level of psychological distress. So this suggests that parent participation in the CareerAdvance program might be particularly helpful in getting children who might be at the highest risk to more consistently attend Head Start. We should be cautious, though, in drawing conclusions about causality from these analyses. The design is a strong quasi-experimental design. The researchers drew the matched comparison group from the same Head Start program and matched the groups on factors that could be related to selection, like motivation for healthcare employment, as well as demographic variables. However, I do wonder if there could be additional unmeasured variables that could explain group differences. These analyses, though, are suggestive of areas for future research, particularly in studies using experimental designs, which CAP Tulsa and Northwestern also have underway. So I also want to note that it's important to be clear about what we mean when we talk about whole family education programs or whole family approaches or two-generation programs. So CAP Tulsa's program links parent programming focused on workforce development with high-quality early childhood programming. And as you heard, the parent programming can have a variety of different tracks. The program also includes many additional components to support parents, including coaching and a peer cohort model to build social capital. As more programs are considering combining services for parents and children, it's important to identify the key components of the parent and child programs, as well as the additional supports that are provided to parents and children, and to measure them. I also want to applaud the researchers for examining the potential mediating factors or the explanatory mechanisms. They're really trying to understand why providing workforce development programming to Head Start parents might have benefits for children beyond their participation in Head Start. Reducing chronic absenteeism is an intriguing finding worth further investigation. Finally, in my introductory remarks, I noted that few two-generation programs had either in-house staff with data analysis capacity or external research and evaluation partners, with CAP Tulsa being one of the two exceptions we found in our scan. And I would like to kick off the Q&A portion of this webinar, asking our speakers to reflect a bit on this partnership. So I think many people might find it surprising that an organization in Tulsa, Oklahoma would have a research partner in Evanston, Illinois. So one question that I wanted to ask, and I think that we'll start by directing it to the folks at Northwestern and then to CAP Tulsa, but I would like to ask how this partnership got started, how you found each other, and then if you think about it, do you have advice for other programs and researchers who would be interested in developing similar partnerships?
Thanks so much, Kathleen. So I'll kick it off if that's okay for a first answer.
Yep, you go.
Okay, sounds great. So I just wanted to say that it's actually a pretty cool story of how this all evolved for us. We'd received some funding to look at answer the question, would Head Start be a reasonable platform for advancing parents' education and careers? And so we went out to 3 programs in Denver, Chicago, and Miami and interviewed everyone, the parents, the teachers, the family support staff, board members, leadership, to try and understand 2 questions. One, whether or not it would be a shift in mission to focus on parents' education in addition to high-quality early education for children, and also to look at whether or not it was feasible to even invest in this way. And we did end up finding that there's pretty much resounding support almost across the board for this idea that there was great recognition among every level that investing in parents was going to improve the outcomes for children and that everyone understood that. So what happened is we thought we were going to have funding to actually make these programs happen in these 3 cities, and that did not happen. And so we thought, well, who else is already doing that? So we did a search of all the programs in the country. Was anyone already taking Head Start as a platform and adding workforce training? Lo and behold, that's how we found out about CAP Tulsa. And then we found out that Chris King at the University of Texas, Austin had also been involved. And so we began a partnership with them, and that at that time there were only about 30 families that were in the CareerAdvance program, or 30 parents of children enrolled in CAP Tulsa's program. And we then decided to begin a partnership, and at that time they received the first Health Professions Opportunity Grant, and that grant allowed them to give a very small portion to research. So we were really just going to look at the 1-year outcomes on parents alone. And then came the opportunity of the Health Professions University Partnership Grant, which allowed us to do this extensive longitudinal study looking at the effects of the program on both parents and children and being able to use multiple measures. So that funding source was essential for us to be able to do the kind of study that we're presenting now and will continue to do to show the impacts of the program. So I think it was both having an idea as researchers that was something that was already happening in practice, and then having researchers like Janae and Stephen Dow, the head of the Community Action Project of Tulsa, Oklahoma, who really understood research, its value both for informing how they developed the program, as well as research to understand the impacts of a new program they were starting over time.
Thanks. And Janae, did you have anything to add from CAP Tulsa's perspective?
The only thing I'll add is, Teresa kind of mentioned it at the end, we have a leader here, Stephen Dow, and the rest of our leadership team. We're all very data-driven, and we're very comfortable with research projects. It's funny, Kathleen, you brought that question up and said, why would someone in Tulsa, Oklahoma be working with a research team partway across the country? But that's just kind of how we do business here. And the whole 12 years I've been here, we've taken on many demonstration and pilot projects, all with evaluation components. And that's just something that's kind of integrated into our culture and we're comfortable with and actually seek out. And really try to find the experts, and that's what we did, and that's how CareerAdvance came to be, and we just kind of don't know it any differently.
That's great. Thank you. We are receiving questions through the Adobe Connect. I had one other question that I wanted to put out to you about the development of the partnership over time. So we heard during the presentations about changes to the program that have been made over time, such as adding rungs and tracks. I'm wondering to what extent that happened in response to data that were being collected, and also how has it affected the ongoing research. And I think, Janae, you might want to take this question first.
Okay. So we have really been more of, from my perspective, it's been more of a partnership than an evaluator/program relationship. The Northwestern team and the Ray Marshall team, like I said in my presentation, have been with us from the beginning. They helped design the program. In the first several years, we were on the phone. Started out weekly, I think, and then evolved to at least monthly check-ins, and we still have ongoing calls where we check in and stay up to date with each other so they know what's going on the program side and we know what's going on the research side. And we reach out to them quite a bit and use them as sounding boards and ask for advice and input. And I would say, using the data, we absolutely have used the data as an ongoing kind of input to the program and made improvements based on it. A great example of that is through this family life study, the research teams would come to town and do focus groups with participants. And we would get a nice report back from those focus groups that, gave input directly from the participants without program staff in the room. So they were very candid and we could take that and learn from it and improve different things as we are going on. I'm going to let Teresa and Terri answer the part about how did research keep up with all of the changes, or how that impacted.
Thanks so much, Janae. So I'll just make two comments around challenges in this, since I've already given all the positives. You know, CAP Tulsa began a program that was a new model, and as Janae spoke, it was important for them to learn how to address workforce training and something that was new to an early childhood education program. And so the program did evolve over time, which in some cases sort of left us studying somewhat of a moving target. But I think what happened is essentially the core elements of the program remained throughout, but we were able, through our continuous improvement process, to give them feedback from our focus groups with both parents as well as program staff and partnerships to try and improve the program as it went along. So we were doing a tricky dance between providing enough input to make the best program possible, but not shift the core elements so that what we were testing remained largely the same. So I would say that very much has been a balancing act throughout the process. And the second point I would make is I think it has taken a lot of work to support and patience on the part of CAP Tulsa to understand how long it does take to get these kinds of findings. We have been in partnership for 8 years. The specific CAP Family Life Study has been a little less time than that, but still has taken a long time, and they've shown patience in these evolving results. And I'm just glad we're finally here to present them.
Great, thank you. So we have a few questions that I think will be best addressed, well, they will be more completely addressed in post-webinar materials, but just to highlight those, there was a request for the research on how additional family income can increase student achievement, which was mentioned in the first presentation, and that is a Duncan et al. 2011 reference. It's in developmental psychology, and we can include that in the materials. And for the team at Northwestern, there were a couple of questions regarding the scales and the questions that you used, specifically regarding measuring parent optimism and self-efficacy. I think if one question is whether those measures are in the literature or if they were created for the study, and they were also asking if you would be able to share those instruments. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Sure. Yeah, these were not measures that we created just for this study. They're measures that were previously validated. Some of them came from the New Hope study. One was, I think, the specific questions regarding the work role salience measure as for a measure of career identity, as well as the revised life orientation test for optimism. And we're happy to share those sites at a later date.
That's great. Thank you. We had a question, I think I mentioned, and maybe Teresa might have as well, that there are very few evaluations of two-generation programs, and the question was whether that was just in Oklahoma or if it was everywhere, and it was in fact everywhere. So in our literature review and our scan of programs, we found very few programs that are currently operating programs, I should be more specific, that have an evaluation component. There were past evaluations of programs that are no longer in existence, and they didn't have the most promising of findings. And a couple, yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I would just add on that, you know, there are several studies that were implemented in the 1990s that were workforce development programs for low-income parents that were largely unsuccessful, but didn't have sort of a true two-generation focus and largely didn't sort of focus on the importance of early childhood education programs. And then more recently, there was the enhanced early Head Start study, but beyond that, there is not a lot of literature out there.
That's great. Thank you. So a couple of question for Northwestern too. The question, what groups comprise the matched comparison? If you could talk a little bit more about how the comparison group was formed.
Sure. So not to get overly technical, but I'm happy to follow up with more details. But so our cohort came in relatively small sizes, about 30 parents per cohort. And so what we did is each year, as Janae mentioned, there were 2,000 families each year of parents. And so we basically looked at the demographic characteristics of those families who were not in CareerAdvance and tried to match them to the parents who were in the CareerAdvance group. The important thing is that early on we were able to work with CAP Tulsa to add a survey of all parents that was part of their needs-based assessment to gauge their interest and motivation to advance their education in the healthcare sector. And so we were able to use that motivation score also as a matching variable. So it wasn't just demographics. It was parents who had expressed interest in the healthcare sector, in improving their own education and employment, but just hadn't enrolled yet in CareerAdvance. And in fact, we did such a good job matching that many of our parents who were in the match comparison group later on actually do enroll in CareerAdvance, but it started out as a very small program, and so it's sort of understandable that those parents wouldn't have enrolled yet.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. This one is for Janae. The question is, it sounds like there are many key supports that were provided for parents. Can you speak to how those pieces were implemented?
Sure, yeah. So if you remember back to that slide that had a picture of the parent and the child in the middle and all the different components around it, we really embedded those components from the beginning. And like Teresa said, those supports were really the core of our program that we tried hard not to change or alter too much over time. So, things like the cohort approach, that's something that stayed consistent from the beginning, really building those peer connections and having them in class together, outside of class together, just building that group. The coach role has remained consistent from the beginning. Kind of the thing that's changed about that is bringing in those partnerships that have similar roles, similar coaching roles, but the career advisor, the family support specialist, and then our academic coaches really working together as a team to support those families. And then one thing that has changed that I didn't speak to, but it came up in the FLS impact findings. In the beginning, in the first 5 years of CareerAdvance, we did offer a financial incentive. So it was based on attendance, and then there were also bonus options if for grades and for completion and employment. The potential to earn up to, I think it was $3,000 a year. I think the attendance incentive was about $200 a month. We did away with that under the second round of HPOG funding for a couple of reasons. Just it was a big administrative burden, and the funding changed a little bit on the second round where we couldn't actually pay funds directly to participants like we did in the first round. So because of that, and then just because of the shorter duration of our tracks, we didn't have participants with us as long, so they weren't able to earn as much. So that's when we shifted to just a straight transportation and assistance, not incentive. So yeah, I think, I don't know if I'm actually answering the question that as they intended me to, but we really just implemented all of those components in the beginning, and like I said, I've tried to keep them consistent throughout the program.
Great, thank you. So we are right at time. I want to thank all of our presenters. This has been very interesting. This has been an exciting webinar. All of the materials will be posted to the SSRC website, and all attendees should receive notification when those materials are posted. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's conference call. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect.